What steps are normally taken to mitigate earthquake risk to an individual well site, or well shaft, I guess, or whatever you would call it?
You mean to the surface facilities or to the well?
The well itself, yeah.
Well, for a start, there's multiple steel casings installed in the ground, depending on the depth. I haven't brought a drawing to explain that to you, but near the surface there may be up to 3 concentric steel casings installed in the ground. As you get deeper there'll be 2, and then at greater depth only 1. And they are cemented to the ground, so there's very firm bonds between the ground and the steel casing in the ground. Now, the other thing about earthquake hazards is that strong shaking only occurs at the ground surface. The safest place to be in an earthquake is underground. If you're in a tunnel, you're in a mine, something like that, the earthquake waves pass through. They don't get the reflection, they don't release the energy as they do at the ground surface. So the safest place to be is underground.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this. Have you done any analysis on how much, well, first of all, I'm really interested in out of 100, what's the, how confident are you out of 100 to finding a decent commercial, just as a gambler, which you are, of course, being an oil man. But secondly, if you do find oil or gas in economic amounts, what kind of benefit is that to the Wairoa community in terms of spend and jobs?
Well, let's start with the last question. We'll answer that first. And I think we just need to look at what happened when Westec were drilling around Wairoa through the late 90s. It had quite an effect on the local community. There were a number of people employed. I don't have the numbers, but the drilling rig, when it's working, has a support staff of around about 40-odd people, shift workers and hands and all sorts of folks. And there may have been 10 or a dozen local people that were hired at that time. I mean, that's just an off-the-cuff guess. But something that's really stuck with me is that as we've gone back and talked to iwi just in the last year or two, it turns out there are a number of people that were employed through that period who are still working in the oil and gas industry. They still have their contacts in Wairoa, but they're working in the Middle East, Australia, around the world. They picked up skills and a track record that's put them into that sort of position. So there is that sort of benefit. But the local spend in the community, I know the butcher's shop did very well in Wairoa. I know there's a couple of pubs that did very well. And it did have an impact in a small community like that. In Taranaki, where the oil and gas industry has been for quite a long time, it's had a profound effect in that community as well. There's a large multiplier that comes away from our spend into the exploration area. And I think I know there's been a study carried out by Ministry of Business and so on, looking at what effect a shale discovery might have on the East Coast and the various scenarios that they've addressed and tried to report on. Sorry? I'm confident that we're going to locate the shales. The risk is, can we get the right fracturing technology to open them and get flow to the surface and be economic? Part of the economic, or what makes these economic now when they probably weren't before, is the price of oil, and that's relatively high compared to historic pricing.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. Could you describe to us, in terms of hydraulic fracturing, the differences in fracturing shale as against conventional oil-bearing rock, as against, say, the geothermal industry in Taupo, the hydraulic fracturing they use? And can you give an indication of the amount of water that's required for an ongoing operation?
Well, there are so many different scenarios in terms of how many fractures you're trying to, or how many fracture operations you're trying to run in a particular well. The geothermal industry, as you know, use hydraulic fracturing. Even conventional oil and gas activities in Taranaki are now using hydraulic fracturing. The idea is that we improve the permeability of the reservoir so we can get higher extraction. With the conventional reservoir, we're trying to get the oil to flow out of quite a porous sand, so that oil is filling those pore spaces in the sand. Not all of those pores are interconnected, so the fracturing activity creates those connections and allows the oil to flow to the surface. So it's becoming much more widespread through even the conventional industry as well as the unconventional, which is what we're looking at here. So I can't provide you with an easy answer to that, but the initial fracturing that we want to do in the first well here is relatively small because it's a vertical well. We're just wanting to create a fracture that will run through the shale and connect the pores and see whether we can get oil or gas returned to the surface.
Thank you. We'll go around the table and then we might wrap it up. Councillor Belfin.
The water. There's a question about water.
How much?
Volumes of water.
It's going to depend on the size of the fracture, and we haven't spec'd that out yet, so I can't provide you with a definitive answer. That will clearly come through as part of our AEE work.
Yes, Councillor Belfin, we'll do a quick round up and we'll wrap it up.
Perhaps just to add something there are very the developments going on in other parts of the world in terms of the fluids that are used for hydraulic fracturing. It doesn't have to be fresh water. There's folks that are now using salt water, wastewater, and even using gas as a medium to create the fracture. So in terms of perhaps impact on freshwater supplies, because of pressures that are running around in other parts of the world, the industry is developing these other fluids to use. So.
Thank you. Councillor Belfin.
Yes, our briefing paper for this presentation refers to consent applications expected soon. Can you give a little more precision as to when that might happen?
No, I can't. It will be within the next few months. Yeah.
Councillor Bevan.
Thanks, Chair. You've talked about and specified one well, but presumably that's one of a program of wells that you're planning to put down. Can you give us an idea of timeframes and number of wells that you anticipate doing?
No, there's a number of variables there. Clearly, if we don't have success with the well that we've planned, we may be rethinking strategy, and who knows what will happen after that. But if we are successful, then it's just a question of what capital we'll have available to push ahead with further activities.
Moving round, Councillor Pipe.
Dr. Brown, the map that you showed with all the drill sites was quite. I was quite interested in that because it dates right back. You were saying that some of those drill sites go right back. You know, the drilling activity has occurred there over the last 50 years, maybe, is it?
Perhaps Mr. Chairman has more information than I know. The Gisborne well was drilled back in the 20s or 30s. Sure. And I think Mangaoni was quite an early one. Maybe that was 60s. Opatama was definitely 60s.
So it has really quite a long history in that particular area. Yeah. Two things. Why is it that oil companies keep on coming back to that? What is it special about that particular area? And the other thing is, how much oil is actually being generated from those wells?
I think one of the things that keeps people coming back is that it is an active petroleum system in place, and we can see that from the oil and gas seeps at the surface. So, there's clearly a source there that's generating oil and gas, and we believe it's these shales because of the geochemistry that's typed the oils at the surface back to the source rocks. So the dilemma has been to try and find the oil and gas as it's migrated from the source to the surface, to find it in a trap. And that's the sands that these wells have all targeted. Have been traps obviously above the source, between the source and the surface. And the geology is complicated. The sands that the earlier explorers have been looking at are patchy, they're not necessarily continuous. The seismic coverage is patchy, so we can't see exactly where these sands pinch in and out we can see them in a 2D line, as I showed you on that seismic section. But what happens away from that line can sometimes be problematic. So it's been an interesting exercise for the explorers to try and get to grips with that and place wells in the right location. So the prospectivity has remained the same, even though these wells weren't successful. All of the wells that Westec drilled encountered natural gas. There was shows in each of them, and I guess that was a positive. And clearly from the Kahara 1 well that flowed some very strong gas for a while before it turned to water, that was a pretty positive sign as well.
Further questions? Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting. We're heading to Wairoa, I think, in the next month or two, so it would be quite good if we could have a scheduled stop-off and have a look at some of these if there's something to see. My question to you is around the stakeholder engagement and any success stories or resistance. Just a bit of a comment on that, on taking the community with the journey with you would be appreciated.
So far we haven't seen any resistance, and again I think the previous activity that Westec carried out in there is still recent enough that most people remember that, and I think generally had a positive view. So hopefully we can continue on that note.
Thank you. Someone, are you happy to move the recommendation, or do you have a question first? Or
nothing particularly to do directly with the report. I'm happy to move we receive the report.
Happy to move we receive the report. We have a seconder. And Councillor Bevan, thank you. You wish to speak, Councillor Barker? No? Speak. Any other speakers? I'll just take an opportunity to thank you for your presentation. We will see you again in due course, and please join us for a morning tea, which we will adjourn for shortly. Yes. I'll put the motion first. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Councillor Barker.
Some time ago, I put on the agenda the issue of the Regional Council developing its own policy on oil and gas exploration. There's some work and paper being on that. It's gone off to the Environmental Committee, I believe. I just wonder if we could have a bit of a report on the progress of that at the next Environmental Committee, because it seems that the issue that I was concerned about then was the future is coming at ours and we're not really planned enough, and I think this presentation today reinforces the view I had at the time that this issue is on the way to us and we need to engage with our community, make sure that we've got a policy and a process that they feel comfortable with and can fit with the needs of the oil and gas industry, and they understand what the rules are as far as we're concerned.
Thank you. Well, let's break for morning tea. 10 minutes. Back here at 1:45, please.